Welcome. Thank you very much for joining us for the 16th episode of YCP's virtual monthly series, Refiner's Fire. Every month, Catholic business leaders from diverse industries share spiritual and professional wisdom with us, all in short 30-minute live sessions. And in spite of the short length of these segments, we hope the tips and insights will be really powerful for all of us as we strive to work and witness for Christ this year. The name of our series, Refiner's Fire, actually comes from scripture, from Malachi, where we learn that God is like a refiner's fire who seeks to purify us and make us the best we can be. And that's the whole point of this series. Through the inspiration and wisdom shared by these exceptional Catholic leaders, we're inspired and challenged to improve in small ways in our spiritual and professional lives. So let's be open to this journey of refinement, that in everything we do it aiming for that higher standard of excellence that gives glory to God. So our topic this month is Catholic Capitalism. We'll explore the social teachings of the Catholic Church and how they serve as a roadmap and really secret ingredient to success. We'll also explore our own leadership journey, seeking to embody the Church's teaching around the common good, human justice, subsidiarity, and more. I can't think of a better person to speak on this topic than Jeff Schiefelbein. Jeff serves as the co-founder and chief culture officer at Five, a North American advisory firm, and has received numerous accolades, including 5 appearances on on Inc. 5000 and dozens of Best Places to Work awards. So welcome, Jeff. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Jen. It's an honor, and it's great to be back with you. Thank you.
All right, so let's just dive right in. Why is this topic, Catholic capitalism, so important to you, and why do you think it should matter to young Catholic workers today?
You bet. This is probably my favorite question and something I get to dive into a lot in my business. First of all, I think that if you back up a step, all of our education systems and most of our businesses have created this sort of feeling that in order to be successful in our careers, we have to check our faith at the door, right? We're told that we have to live kind of this divided life where there's really no place in business to be authentically faith forward in everything that you're doing. That in fact, if you were Christian or, worse, Catholic, you're probably going to be offensive, and that's probably counterproductive. So I hear this sentiment a lot, right? I hear it in for-profit businesses, nonprofit businesses, and it breaks my heart to say that it actually exists in many Catholic institutions as well. And my view that I've gone through in my life is that's just fundamentally false, and not only false, but it's dangerous, right? It's dangerous to think that way. And I just have felt called to highlight that in order to have a successful career, you should really take a very different approach, the exact opposite. So I want to explore a little bit of that with you. So I think that we're called to live this undivided life where we fully integrate everything about us, right? Who we are, what we believe, that we share our rightly ordered priorities, that our behaviors and our attitudes all reflect that, so that in this undivided life, we're actually glorifying God, right? The authenticity of who we are. But it's difficult, right? You know this from talking to young Catholics, but really not just young Catholics, almost all Catholics, that in order to own that responsibility, we first have to engage and fully grasp, what does our faith even teach us, right? What do we personally know about the way the gospel talks to us about showing up at work? And I've been on both ends of the spectrum, right? I've been typical corporate America, where I've made decisions that were self-serving, that were about my own pocketbook and my own connection to power or title or whatever. And I've also been on the other side where it's decisions and leadership that are connected to this social doctrine, where we're focused on deploying what the church has taught us. So a couple of things that I want to share. Early in my career, I actually started on 2 different paths and came to this beautiful intersection. One was this pathway of, I'm just going to be truth seeking, right? I'm going to try and react and see if it feels good or if it's a failure or a success. And I was leading hundreds of people at an early age. And it was almost like a recipe, like what ingredients lead to the best job satisfaction for me? What ingredients lead to the most flourishing moments for the people around me? And which ones are leading to failure? And I found those patterns and I started to apply them in my life. And simultaneously, I was studying more and more about my faith, right? And even thanks to young Catholic professionals, I was around in the very earliest days, and I was called to go deeper in my faith. So how do I have a more vibrant relationship with Christ? what can I read about in virtuous leadership, or listen to great Catholic speakers, both in YCP and on the national stage, and start to apply those. And the convergence happened for me about 7 years ago when a document came out called The Vocation of the Business Leader.
Mm-hmm.
That document is like a 30-page reflection put out by the Pontifical Council for Justice and Peace. And it really illuminated the social teachings of the Catholic Church for the business person. And I mean, all of a sudden, I was on this personal exploration, and I figured out that firsthand human nature and the importance of work as a vehicle for human flourishing matched all the words in this document, right? I was given the language and the context and the history. And Jennifer, I had like the biggest aha moment, like, oh, this is why the things I did at some points in my life worked and they were sustainable, and why others weren't. And oh, the church has known this all along. So I realized like the key to all of this is listening to the teachings of Jesus Christ and knowing them will allow you to have business success, but to transcend even the present moment to do something that's more meaningful. So I hope that helps to answer like, why does this matter to me? It's because it is the answer to what I think people are seeking in their business.
Absolutely. And, you know, I like what you've said too, because I think so often we say that we're Catholic and we kind of say that we embrace our Catholic identity, but then when it comes to living that practically at work, we think we have to kind of go about it on our own. But no, there's resources out there for us, as you've just mentioned, and we really we need to dive into them because it's so important, not just for ourselves, but others. Jeff, you mentioned that work is a vehicle for human flourishing. Can you expound on that? And then along those lines, are there any practical tips that we can deploy now, knowing that this is what the church teaches?
Yeah, sure. I always start with stories. You know this. When I was 20 years old, I launched my first nonprofit. It's called Carpool. It's at Texas A&M, and it's a program to reduce drunk driving in that town by providing free, non-judgmental rides home to people in need. What's interesting, though, is before anybody knew what Carpool was, I was working on it for a year, and I found myself trying to make sure that I knew every detail, that I had final say in every decision. I wasn't giving people freedom, responsibility, autonomy. In fact, I was holding back the creative efforts of the people around me. And what's interesting is that need for control was causing me to burn out, and it was also holding people back. Ultimately, the story goes that I ended up hospitalized after we launched the program.
Wow.
The second weekend ever that Carpool ran, somebody else had to run it, and I was dialing in from a hospital room. Yeah, it was, I mean, a very tumultuous time in my life. But there's a couple of great lessons that came from that. One is, that's a really bad place to be, that I became a liability to the organization because I was the one who knew everything about every topic. In fact, there should never be any topic where it's all predicated on one person's knowledge. So I want to be an asset, not a liability. But the second part that has stuck with me even more is that if we ever limit people's decision-making authority and their chance for growth, we're limiting energy, creativity, appropriate risk-taking, their total contribution. We're really limiting their ability to be formed and to grow into who God called them to be. And I have a quote here. It's from St. John Paul II said, he reminded us that the fundamental truth that man is created in the image of God and shares by his work in the activity of the Creator. So think about that. When given this, that you're doing work that is dignified, right? It can't be work that's a co-creation with evil, but when it's in this co-creation with the Creator, all of a sudden you realize that man wasn't made for work. Work was made for man. It's where we become fully formed to be who God called us to be. So the Catholic word for it that I love is this 6-syllable word, as all Catholics like to have difficult words, is subsidiarity. And I've been dropping subsidiarity into every speech I give because I want people to have to go look up, like, what is this dude talking about? It's a very Catholic word. But in the business world today, you might hear topics like extreme empowerment and this ongoing education and development and flat organizations of people making decisions. And those are great. I actually love them. But I think they lack the context and the depth of the word subsidiarity. So in this, right, if we're to provide a place where people are getting formation, where they can thrive, we also have to structure our companies, our relationships, and our communications so that it equips employees and trusts employees to do their best work. And at our company at 5, we actually like to use a phrase, we took it from a book, but that at 5, we treat our employees like they're fully formed adults. And I think there's something beautiful to that. And when people are given that chance, right, to contribute, to give their full self and their God-given talents, to really grow into it, I think it's transcendent because they're being shaped and molded by this co-creation, and they're becoming a contributor to the world around them, regardless of how big that contribution. And that's a chance for all of us to glorify God. So you kind of asked about examples of this. First, I want to say, I don't care if you're the janitor, a mid-level manager, or a CEO. This applies to everybody when you're doing dignified work. But as a leader, you have a huge say in this, right? First, you should start by creating this alignment around vision and this alignment around the core values of the organization, kind of this full buy-in of where we're going and the principles that we're not going to budge from, right? And once you have that, then you're not just encouraging people to step forward and take tasks. You're also creating this environment where accountability and responsibility allows people to just step in and take on tasks and fix problems and raise their hand. And along the way, right, I'll tell somebody, make sure you seek good counsel or seek advice if you need something, but just go forward. I encourage you to make mistakes. I encourage you to have open dialogue. And as a leader, don't look over their shoulder. Don't explain how you would have done something differently. Don't cringe when somebody's doing something that you think is going to fail, so long as it's not going to sink the ship, right? And find ways that you're thanking them for their effort and you're emboldening them by saying, I trust you, regardless of the outcome. So the pushback is always like, well, what about somebody who's malicious? Very, very few people in your organization are malicious. Those people will jump out and be so obvious if you have subsidiarity and accountability. So just trust everyone instead. And then as a coach and a mentor, when you're going along this path, try to find out from somebody, not what was the actual step you took, but what were your motivations? What did you expect to happen? What struggles did you have along the way? And what did you think of the outcome? And then you can kind of do that, like, what would you have done different? So even in failures, you're learning along the way and you keep encouraging somebody. I love this phrase. It was given to me by a CEO 10 years ago. He said, do something even if it's right. And let that sit with you, right? Like, do something. It might be right. It might be better than what I would have done. Maybe it's worse. I don't know. And I'm not so sure that it matters, because what matters is your formation allows you to lock in and be a part of your own personal growth and your biggest contribution. That's a leader, right? There's some people on this call right now who are like, great, I'm entry level in my career. I'm low on the totem pole. Well, first I would say, know your own personal priorities. And so, you know, if you get those out of whack, it's pretty hard to kind of engage in this. But for me, my priorities are relationship with Christ, relationship with Amanda, my wife is next, relationship with my kids after that, and then everybody else, Jen and my coworkers and my competition, right? Everybody else kind of comes after that. Once I have those straight, though, as an employee, then I would encourage you to just become an impact player, whatever that means to you, right? An impact player is solution-oriented, not problem-oriented. They are trying to handle the task at hand, not just, and then seeking more, right? Not just stopping there.
Right.
An impact player will lead when they need to, they'll follow, they'll calibrate along the way. But then one of my favorite statements is that an impact player helps to make work light.
I like that.
Yeah, and imagine, just one last thought on this. If you were to make work light, even if you were in a culture of micromanagement and the lack of subsidiarity, over time, you're kind of chipping away at that foundation, and the leaders around you delegate a little bit more to you, trust a little bit more, believe in others a little bit more, and you're just moving, even ever so slowly, that culture towards a place of subsidiarity and growth. So you do have a say as an employee and an individual contributor.
Wow. That's amazing. And I just thinking about, you know, the prayer that we always say at YCP, our St. Joseph prayer, you know, teach me to see in my fellow workers the Christ who desires to be in them, you know. And I think that that's what really at the heart of what you're saying is that we're trying to see Christ in everyone and treat them with dignity. And the ripple effect of that is just going to be contagious, not only for your own organization, but for the world, for the glory of God. So that's incredible. Jeff, could you go into more depth and into some of these, you know, new words that we're hearing? We're hearing words like ESG, conscious capitalism. There's a lot of Catholic roots to these words, right?
There are, and I love that. So I've been very blessed. I'm probably 6 or 7 years into being involved in conscious capitalism. If you know anything about my industry, the deregulated power industry, we've been at the bleeding edge of the E in ESG for many years now. And I've seen firsthand how the business principles tied in all of these, actually, once you again go deeper in your faith, have always been there, right? They're coming straight from the teachings of Christ. But
Mm-hmm.
the one that I'm probably most involved with is conscious capitalism. And to give you a quick background, conscious capitalism was kind of launched when a guy named Raj Sisodia was studying what makes Whole Foods so strong as a brand and where everybody loved and contributed to it. And then also wrote a book called Firms of Endearment, where they would study other companies. And so John Mackey from Whole Foods and Raj have kind of launched this movement about 20 years ago. And they really found these 4 pillars that people, or companies, I should say, adhered to. And they're pretty obviously tied to the faith when you go deeper. I joke all the time that if you just put "and Jesus" in here, you would start to have a real Catholic social teaching. But the first is these firms exist for a higher purpose, right? Profit is not a higher purpose. Profit is needed to run the organization, needed for the human, but my body doesn't exist to pump blood and breathe oxygen, but that's needed, just like the organization and my family need money. And having money is okay. It's what we do with it that matters. So having a higher purpose, they all focus, instead of on shareholder value, they focus on stakeholder value, right? This idea that every stakeholder is involved in a win-win-win scenario that's not a zero-sum game. Really, stakeholders can include your employees, clients, vendors, suppliers, the environment, the community, and it can go much further into sub versions of that as well. And then I'll lump together the third and fourth principles just for brevity, that you also need to have conscious leadership and conscious culture, which really is just this whole idea that if you are so concerned about the entire value chain of who you touch and how you show up, then the success of your business significantly improves the lives of almost everybody around you. Real quick example, the Himalayan salt company that I heard the speaker or the founder talk about, how much he went deeper and deeper and started to care for the families and the children of the salt miners, and making sure that they had education and opportunity, right? That's conscious leadership, conscious culture. But if you read, and I'll just throw it up here because everybody needs to have this, the compendium of the social doctrine of the Catholic Church, and the short version being the vocation of the business leader, it's the same stuff, right? We're called to run businesses that are focused on the common good, right? Higher purpose. We are focused on, under that umbrella, creating services and products that honor the dignity of all mankind. We're supposed to operate in solidarity with the poor. We promote the formation of people through subsidiarity, and we do this all for the sustainable wealth, for its just distribution for every stakeholder, right? So if you kind of compare all of these, conscious capitalism is really just the social teachings of the church with a real focus on the personal growth of a human. The concepts aren't new, if I may, and I know we're short on time in general, but I think about the E in ESG. It's environmental, social, and governance. The E can be controversial because you'll get people that say climate change is X, Y, and Z, and they all fight about it. But what I always tell people is, let's just focus on the E for a second, that environmentally speaking, pollution, waste, production that causes more waste, all of those things, even bad environmental impacts, disproportionately impact the poor and disadvantaged, right? Jeff Schiefelbein's not being impacted by junk in a river. Somebody else is having to deal with that. And Jesus told us that whatever we do to the least of our brothers and sisters, we do to him. So we are called to be in complete solidarity with the poor. And I can easily make that connection all the way back to how much I do care about environmental impact, whatever that means to anybody and wherever they are on their journey. Last part I'll say there is, I watched a film 6 months ago called Beyond Zero about this company Interface and this guy who in '89 decided to become a sustainable company.
Wow.
And it is a heroic leadership journey of caring about all stakeholders. And I saw God's hand at play when they redesigned their carpet tiles based on what they saw in biomimicry, focused on how the forest floor looks, what geckos do for gravity, how birds' feathers tie together. And they were removing in that process waste and harmful glues and having happier clients. Last year, they released the world's first ever carbon negative carpet tile. It sequesters more carbon than it takes, than if it didn't exist at all. It's a small amount, but think about that God's hand in this business. That he's teaching us how to live in a way that is in line with the gospel, even in making carpet tile.
And then work becomes so much more meaningful, right? I mean, it's not just something we do for a paycheck. It's incredible.
That company is not experiencing the Great Resignation. Let me tell you that. They care about what they're doing.
Exactly. All right, we're running short on time. Jeff, one more question before we take live Q&A. So everyone, please be thinking of your questions for Jeff. So our conference is coming up, and the theme is "Thy Will Be Done." So just tell us how everything you're talking about aligns with this concept of a business person really embracing God's will for their life.
Yeah, that's a great one. So Christ came to earth in the form of a man, right? He taught us everything we need to know. When we follow the typical fashion that we're taught and live this divided life, we're trying to serve two masters, and we all know that doesn't work. But when we're intentional about living our Catholic faith and knowing it and following the teachings of Christ, that undivided life allows us to be better employees, better leaders, better co-creators with God, and we then align ourselves with the will of God. And so then in operating and going through our relationships and our communication with that mindset, we get to be followers of Christ who love God above all others, love each other more than we love ourselves, and disciple to all nations. And I believe that if you show up like that, you're present like that in an undivided way, then you are aligned with the will of God.
Amazing. All right. I can't wait to see what questions this has inspired. All right. Let's see what our first question is. From Sophia, do you think alternative business structures could help with cultivating more virtuous workers and workplaces? Have you seen any examples of this?
So when I think of alternative business structures, the one that jumps out at me that's pretty extreme is holacracy. And I don't know how familiar people are with this, but you want to really challenge yourself. Go study or look this up. Holacracy is a company structure. And I think this might actually be about a different question, but I'm going to answer this anyways. Where there is no boss subordinate direct report relationships. It's almost teams of teams and impact based on skill set and availability. And there are major struggles to it. But at the same time, there are people who have made major advancements. I think Zappos is one of the first. There's a company in town that I'm blanking on the name, Paravita in town here, that's a big national consulting company that has done some holacracy work. So that's like structure within the organization. That's good to challenge ourselves, because norms only exist sometimes because they exist, not because they make sense.
Right.
When I also think about structures like benefit corporations, different kinds of for-profits and not-for-profits, I would say that a lot of times those can be signaling of what the intent is, right? They can help to remind the internal and external stakeholders that in a benefit corp, there's a brand called Cotopaxi, right? They make all this good gear, hoodies and stuff. They're a benefit corp. And when you know that, you probably are more attracted as somebody that's this mindset to go work there. You might pick that brand over another brand. So there's places that are reinforcing. But the truth is, there isn't an organization on earth. You could take a financial institution, a law firm, all for profit, and say that just by intention alone, by leadership and followership of these principles, you could have the same impact without having to have some moniker or some label over it. So yes, they're good, but they're not the only answer.
Amazing. Interesting. Okay, let's see what our next question is. Lauren, how do we prevent automation and growing wealth inequality from reaching a crisis point?
Wow. I hope that somebody else has the answer to this one. So first of all, it is a huge problem. And if you read Vocation of the Business Leader, they talk about globalization. They talk about how the homogeneous nature of the way our cultures are transcending. In fact, I just heard somebody say that when they traveled around and studied like 6 or 7 different cultures, they were having trouble telling the difference between people in Brazil and Russia and Germany, because we're becoming so homogeneous. We're losing some of this richness of who we are. I think there's some pretty ugly stuff happening with big tech. But at the same time, you're seeing some good and bad actors show up and say they're going to disrupt big tech. We vote with our feet. We vote with our dollars. We vote with our clicks. And we can sit here and say we're against some of these inevitable train wrecks that are happening, and still go on the same platforms and make money for them by seeing the ads or buying the very convenient thing that shows up, whatever it is for you. So I would say one is be smart about your impact, because just like in a small, an organizational culture, you can make a change by the way you show up and take that impact player mentality.
Mm-hmm.
You can also make an impact when enough people unsubscribe from something, enough people raise their hand and go and support the local merchant,
Mm-hmm.
the national conglomerate that is living and promoting virtuous leadership and values.
Right.
Be a part of it. But to say I have the answer on how we're going to stop it, I think YCP is one of the many pronged approaches to making sure that we have community.
Mm-hmm.
A little bit of this Benedict option, right? My community exists with Gen Baugh and hundreds of people throughout the nation because of my involvement with YCP.
Mm-hmm.
That's who reinforces me. That's who gives me strength when I feel like I'm making decisions that are against the grain.
Totally.
And we got to magnify that.
Thank you. Absolutely. All right. Do we have another question? Wegman, okay. What is your view on climbing the company ladder raises in respect of self-serving interests versus fulfilling God's will?
Great question. So I think there's a couple things here, and I'm going to go back to intention for a second. There is the desire to climb the company ladder and making sure that you are positioning yourself all the time that is harmful, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you get promotions and raises, and I actually find this all the time. The more you're actually just an impact player, the more things fall in your lap. Kind of reminds me of dating for all of you that are single. When you go out looking to meet a girl, you seem like you're trying too hard. When you go out and have a great night, you end up meeting a lot of great people, and you may end up dating one of them. Well, I think about the same thing in business. If you show up because you want to help people, to make an impact, to use your God-given talents and gifts, it's noticed. When you show up because you want to make sure that I'm right and you're wrong and I get ahead of the other guy, you might still get the bonus or the promotion, but it gets noticed, and it will backfire later. A book that I teach all the time is Tribal Leadership.
I love how you just had that right there.
I know. Listen, I have books ready. I'm ready. In Tribal Leadership, it talks a lot about how half the cultures in America and in business have an I'm great and you're not culture. And you can actually make a lot of money, get a title, grow in your career. And there's companies that we all know that are run that way, tons of them. But then you take a company, let's just use Southwest Airlines, that has a we're great and they're not attitude. That's like a level 4 behavior and communication. And what's really neat about that is you have camaraderie. You're kind of the rising tide floats all boats, and you are in a growth mindset so that you can have moments of level 5. And level 5, which is where the whole company name comes from, is these moments of transcendent breakthrough where you're competing with what's possible and you didn't even know what the outcome was going to be, because it's the collective multiplicity of the team that contributed. Not Jeff was the smartest in the room and I made sure in my 13th email reply all that I made sure I looked like I didn't do anything wrong.
Yeah.
That mindset is toxic, it's counterproductive, and it's actually why we have to have so much fluff inside of companies to deal with issues instead of dealing with solutions. So
yeah, absolutely. I think one of my favorite things you said, Jeff, was just about, how we should seek to make work light. It reminds me of a quote, our guardian angels can fly because they take themselves lightly. And so, in a sense, our companies will flourish and fly if we can help sort of ease that burden and ease that load. And that's what charitable self-giving is all about: humility, all of the virtues that we employ as Catholics seeking to work and witness for Christ. So this was amazing, Jeff. I feel like we could do a million more of these 30-minute segments with you. Thank you so much for being here today and for your incredible wisdom. We really appreciate it.
Blessed to be a part of this. Thank you so much, Jennifer.
All right.